Everyone, my name is Beth Piercy. Myself, along with Laura Fatt, are the co-chairs of the Committee on the Environment, and we're excited that you're here tonight. Before we get started, we have a few announcements. The first one is that we wanted to let everyone know that this event is being recorded and will be posted on the BSA website after the event. I also wanted to let you know that if you would like to receive CEUs for this event, I just pasted a link for a Google form into the chat. Please go to that Google form and fill it out to receive CEUs. I also wanted to announce our May event, which will be May 18th, and that will be over the new BERDO 2.0 ordinance. That should be up on the website shortly. And then the last announcement I wanted to make was, one of the things that has been new about Committee on the Environment this year is that we have had a committee, an actual committee, instead of just two co-chairs that work to plan all the events. It's two co-chairs and, a larger committee that work together. And I know as a co-chair, I can say that has been amazing. I couldn't do it without this group. And in August, we will elect two new co-chairs from the group. And if you're interested in joining the committee, please reach out to Laura or myself, and I will post our emails in the chat because we would love to have more involvement. Speaking of the committee, Allison Zuckman is one of the members, and she will be moderating tonight. If you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat or to just unmute, and we will be going through the chat questions at the end of the presentation. So Allison, take it away. Oh, you're muted.
All right, got it going now. Thanks for joining. And I've got multiple screens going, so if it doesn't look like I'm looking at you, I actually am, but you're on the other screen. So as Beth mentioned, I work at the Green Engineer as Sustainability Consultant in Greater Boston. I know many of you and work with a lot of you. I'm just going to quickly, you'll see the faces on your screen now of all our panelists today, and I'll introduce them in a minute. But I just wanted to give you a quick idea of the agenda. So I'm going to do a few quick introductions where the structure for this talk is the AIA Materials Pledge, the framework that we're using. So Anne, Lisa, and Charlie are going to each show some slides related to that. We'll have a quick panel discussion, and then of course, open it up for questions from all of you. I'm just going to skip ahead quickly. This was the summary that went with the talk tonight. So, this is about material selection, in particular sustainable materials selection. So, we want to choose materials that, that have positive impacts on occupant health, that reduce embodied carbon, that have positive impacts on environmental justice, among other things. And, vetting materials is a confusing and complex process at times. So we're going to count on Anne, Lisa, and Charlie to guide us and simplify it as much as they can, and give us some guidance on how to select materials that are healthy, sustainable, and just. A little context, just so, and Anne, all three of them are going to go more into this, but the materials pledge can be found if you dig through the AIA website. If you haven't found it, the national website, there are 5 categories, which Anne is going to go into detail in a minute. You can get lots of information on the national AIA website, including a materials pledge starter guide. So we can post the links in the chat, and I encourage you guys to look after the call to dig into this a little bit. And then just a little context, why is materials selection important? There's, lots of us are working on green building rating systems. So LEED, WELL, FitWell, Living Building Challenge, all of them. There are a variety of strategies and requirements around material selection, whether it be, low toxic materials, low embodied carbon, healthier materials, a lot of the rating systems are starting to get into equity, choosing things based on equity metrics as well. In Greater Boston alone, for instance, we're seeing materials become more important. The city of Boston is looking at, they have an embodied carbon technical advisory group, and in the future, we will probably see embodied carbon calculations as requirements for permitting, just as we see operational carbon calculations. And then, just a random assortment of other reasons why material selection is important. Companies, a lot of the real estate companies we work with on larger projects, they use these rating systems to contribute toward their corporate ESG reporting, which has a lot to do with health and wellness, as well as environmental and economic concerns. So there's lots of reasons we could go on about why this is important. And then, just generally, based on all that's gone on in the world in the last 2 years, certainly healthy buildings are much more on the forefront, and social equity. So, really, my hope is the work we're doing and the discussion we have today, is just on materials, sustainable materials selection is a step toward making, a healthy, more equitable, and really just safer place for everyone. So on that note, gives you a little context. I'm going to, let's see what the next slide is. Okay, so I'll introduce the three speakers very quickly, and then we'll just get started on some presentations. So Anne Hicks-Hardy is one of our panelists today. She's the founder of Long Green Specs. It was formed in 2016 and provides sustainability-focused construction specification and building science expertise to architecture firms all across the country. She's based in Maryland, has 30 years of architectural practice and specification experience. And among other things, she's a member of the AIA Strategic Council, was on the AIA COTE leadership group, involved in the USGBC, and she's also an AIA and LEED fellow. I think I'll introduce all three of them at once so we can just keep the conversation going. So Lisa Goodwin-Robbins works at Kalin Associates. She's been, in her own words, has been writing architectural specifications almost forever. So that's a long time. She works on a wide variety of projects, assisting architects in all their efforts with healthy material selection and specifications. She, at Kalin, she helps develop the sustainable design specifications for LEED, Living Building Challenge, Passive House, and all sorts of other green building requirements. She's the board chair at the Silent Spring Institute. She's been talking about healthy materials and indoor air quality at national and regional conferences. And she's committed to raising awareness among architects and designers about avoiding toxic chemicals in our built environment. And then the last of the three panelists is Charlie Stevenson. He's the founder of Integrated Eco Strategy, and he is focused on helping clients meet the demanding, industry-changing Living Building Challenge standards. He's been working on Living Building Challenge projects since 2011 and has developed processes and software to facilitate better material selection on projects. He's worked on over 50 Living Building Challenge projects. He works directly with a dozen institutions on projects ranging up to 500,000 square feet, and really is the expert in our area on Living Building Challenge materials requirements in particular. So those are our three speakers. I'm really excited to have them all here today. They have lots of good information to share. And that said, I think I'm just going to get started and have Anne kick it off. Just let me know when you want to advance slides, and off we go.
All right, thanks, Allison. Can you hear me?
Yep.
All right, you can advance.
Oh, definitely.
Right. We decided to wrap this around the AIA Materials Pledge, which was the A&D Materials Pledge when it was presented to the AIA board. They adopted it about 1.5 years ago. The reason is it's a great organization tool. It has 5 impacts, and those are the 5 impacts on the screen. Go ahead and advance. The first one is human health. And this is about supporting human health and basically avoiding toxins. This is trying to get materials that don't have hazardous materials within them. Click. And we all know we stand in buildings where most of us are sitting in buildings right now, and all the substances that we're surrounded by are getting into us, either through inhalation, ingestion, or absorption. The skin is the largest organ we have, and it grabs a bunch of stuff and brings us into our body. I just want to point out that even though we're not small little 2-year-olds and we're in diapers, we still, all of us learned a valuable lesson over the last 2 years about washing hands. We all put our fingers in our mouths, and we also scratch our eyes and do other things. So even though we aren't licking the floor, we're still ingesting stuff. All the stuff out there is getting into us, and that's really truly why we have to be concerned about this. Click. And we're surrounded by all this stuff. We're surrounded by benzene, we're surrounded by halogenated flame retardants, we're surrounded by phthalates and BPA, and it's really confusing. Click. And one of the problems is we don't know where it is. So I made this chart. This is a piece of my chart I made that is on the left-hand side are the red list ingredients that we want to avoid. On the far right is what the health hazard is. And a lot of that we kind of know, but in the middle is where you find it. And it's really, really hard to remember where we're supposed to look. Phthalates make plastic flexible. So if you've got a piece of plastic that isn't rigid, that's probably got phthalates in it. If you've got a piece of plastic that is rigid, that's probably got BPA in it. But it's really hard to keep track of all this. So we have to find a way to keep track of this stuff and figure out how we can get this out of our building products. Click. And I did a presentation to Green Build like a number of years ago with Christian Ritchie and Paula Melton and Jennifer Attlee. It was called Product Rules. And we came up with all these great product rules. So I'm clipping them and throwing them in here. I love this one. This is a great one for health impacts. If you don't know what's inside it, don't put it inside. All right, pretty basic. I have clients that are trying to do red list free interiors. It isn't impossible. Charlie will talk about that later. But think about it and let's try to improve the products that we're using. Click. Climate health. Climate health is about reducing carbon emissions. This is all about carbon. Click. And when we think, this is Architecture 2030, which has done tons of great graphics. We all understand that carbon exists in building operations and it exists in the materials we build with. I'm personally endorse Lloyd Alter's new idea that we're not going to call it embodied carbon. We're going to call it upfront carbon. Embodied carbon is all the stuff that's in the product during manufacture, transport, and extraction, manufacture, all that. When it gets to the building site, you've got all the carbon. So the problem is on day one, your embodied carbon number is total. Your operational carbon is 0, and it goes up on a day-to-day basis as you operate your building. Click. But the problem is we're doing much more efficient buildings. So we're lowering the operations. And the other problem is we don't have 100 years. We don't even have 30 years. We got to keep the temperature of the planet. We got to keep it under 1.5 centigrade of a raised temperature, and we're close, and it's a problem. So we've got to really tackle embodied carbon. Click. So one of the problems is most of the embodied carbon's everywhere. I was with a client today and the line was, where's the carbon? It's where the money is. When you spend money on a product, it comes with carbon, which I said is true, but truly we know a lot about this. We can minimize it. The problem is the big three, concrete, steel, and aluminum are most of it. The problem is concrete, steel, and aluminum, the act of creating those three things creates carbon. So you can make lower carbon concrete and steel. You can't make 0 carbon concrete and steel. It's impossible. We have to find solutions that don't include those products. We have to find other ways of mitigating with those and other things. Click. And my product rule for this category, if you're buying more than a ton of it, know its carbon footprint, because the formula for this is CO2 over kilograms. So when you multiply by the kilogram, those cancel each other out and you end up with just a bigger number. And realize it's not just the heavy stuff. Concrete's heavy, but if you're using tons of gypsum board in your job, that's going to be heavy too. So it's the stuff you use a lot of, the stuff that's heavy. Think about, little hint, if you're buying more than a ton of it, know its footprint. Click. The third one is ecosystem health. This is the one about regenerating all the air, the water, all that good stuff. And the problem, click, One of the issues with this is we don't build with natural things anymore. 1900, we were building 41% of our products were renewable. Now it's minimal. And okay, you're going to say to me, well, and we can't build with natural renewable products. We're building too much. Click. And that's true, but we can think about certain categories. Petroleum-based products, we can try to get those out of our jobs, but I need to point out that there's a wonderful carpets out there. Interface is now making a carbon negative carpet. It's still made of nylon, and nylon is a petroleum-based product. We have to think about all of this stuff and keep track of how we're going to minimize some of this stuff. Click. But there's a lot of plant-based stuff out there. And this is a great website, materialspalette.org. You get through to this via Architecture 2030. It's got all these great ideas, and you click on all those pretty pictures and it'll tell you all about them, including getting you to links for where you can find them. All the plant-based products are going to reduce your carbon. Some of them are going to be carbon negative, which means you get a get out of jail free card that you can use to use more concrete, not too much, just you can use concrete, you can offset. Click. And the other thing to consider when you're talking about ecosystem health is consider the whole product cycle. You just can't think about the product, how it is, how it's made. You got to think about what it's going to happen later, how it's going to be recycled, what's going to happen with demolition. Keep in mind the whole product cycle. Click. The fourth one is social health and equity, which is preferring products from manufacturers that are thinking about the people, their workers, human rights, and also their supply chains. Now, Lisa is probably going to tell you, which she's right, that one of the key ways of keeping social health and equity intact is to use FSC wood and responsibly sourced stone. Extraction is where the slave labor in the building industry is going to land. But there's other things to think about. Click. And whenever I talk about social health and equity, I always get to chlorine. This is actually an ad from a product that is currently marketed in this country, and I've had 2 clients try to get it in their job, and I really beg them not to. It's made of salt, 60% rice hucks, 22% common salt, 18% mineral oil. That's 100%. It's perfect. It's the perfect thing, but it's made of salt. Salt means it's chlorine. All right. The United States exports more chlorine-based chlorine than any other country in the world. We get it all from the Gulf of Mexico. We take Gulf water, we put it in a huge vat. We divide it in half with a filter made of asbestos, which we buy from Russia. And you positively charge one side, you negatively charge the other, you filter it, and we all had high school chemistry. Salt is sodium chloride, NaCl. You split the Na from the Cl, you get chlorine. Oh my God, it's great. Click. And it's not natural, it's made in a factory that looks like that, which is sitting on US Highway 10, which runs across the bottom of our country near the Gulf of Mexico. It is totally ruining people's lives. This is where Cancer Alley is. It is off-gassing all this nonsense. It's a terrible situation. You can hit this with anything. You can hit it with Make America Great. For Christ's sakes, the asbestos is coming from Russia. And by the way, asbestos isn't illegal. Are you kidding me? So there's 5 million ways to do this. Click. The key is avoid chlorine. One thing you can do just tomorrow, ban all chlorine products. Don't use any of this crap. I mean, there's a lot of good reasons for it, but one thing is the workers' rights and how we're treating the workers down by the Gulf of Mexico. Click. And this is another one, buy the company, not just the product. I spec construction specialties products all the time because they have great products and they have tons of declare labels, tons of cradle to cradles. I don't care if this specific locker I'm buying has a cradle to cradle, the company's good. Buy the company, not just the product. Click. The last category is circularity, circular economy. This is about reusing buildings. This is about minimizing waste, reusing materials, not building in the first place. The greenest building you have is the building that already exists. Click. The building industry produces a ton of waste, about double what we produce for municipal solid waste. This is a problem. We're demolishing everything. Click. We have to think of a new waste pyramid upside down. At the bottom is the landfill. We want to avoid that. The first thing you do, don't buy it in the first place. Don't build the building, renovate the building. Don't buy more concrete. The footings are fine. They're going to support your building too. After that, reuse the building, reuse the materials. Try to figure out ways of not sourcing out of new stuff. Recycle and then recover, convert, but try to avoid the landfill at all costs. And it's interesting. Eric Corey Fried wrote a great book, Circular Economy for Dummies. And I've heard him talk, and he says he talks to clients about circular economy. And I said, there's no way your clients want to hear about circular economy. And he says they do, and they get at it because circular economy is a great front door to carbon. Click. Use less, just use it better. All right, that's what we got to do. We all have to learn how to be efficient. We all have to learn how to use less. Click. The materials pledge. This is a little clip of everyone who signed it. It'd be great if your firm signed it. It's not required, but it would be great if your firm signed it. All you have to do, click, you go to the webpage. The way to do this is the AIA website, like so many websites, is a little hard. Put AIA materials pledge into Google, and it will get, the first hit will be this. You get here and it has all the information, but really importantly, don't know where to start. On the top right, explore now. You click on that, click, and you get to this page. The materials pledge starter guide has fabulous information. Look at that. It has links. You can take you everywhere. It's going to show you all this wonderful stuff, all these great resources. The AIA has great resources. It's just hard to swim through their website, but they've collected all the materials resources that they have, and they've put them here. There's really great things. You can lose yourself here. And the Strategic Council is now doing something called a carbon literacy sprint, and we're talking about developing possibly a certification, but definitely education on carbon. So the AIA is there supporting you. Doesn't matter if you're a member or not, but even if you're not, you can still go to the website. It's a free click away. Click. And the last thing I want to leave you with is, do not let perfection be the enemy of better. Okay, you can't possibly get all this right. You got to just try to do something. So the first thing you should do is take one little tip away. Everything that's heavy, I'm going to think about carbon. Anything that I'm putting inside the building, I'm going to know what's inside of it. Great rules. Just choose your rules, figure out what you want to do, but don't worry about, I can't do everything, because if you do that, you'll just cry and go to bed, and nobody wants you to cry. Click. And we just need to demand better products. And that's what we're here talking about. I hand it to Lisa. Tag.
Thank you, Anne. And I just want to tag on that. I'm now on my 10th living building project. None of them are 100% red list free. Don't tell anyone, but they aren't. So let's all just do what we can. Allison, we ready for the next slide? Okay, I'm going to start with some really cheerful stats. 1 in 8 American women will get breast cancer in her lifetime, many more than once. I have equally horrifying statistics about childhood cancer. The number of children with cancer is growing. The number who survive is growing too. But, and you've all heard President Biden talk about the cancer moonshot. Moving through more healthier materials, we can help prevent cancer before it starts, rather than focusing on curing cancer. And he spoke very movingly about his son's environmental exposure to burn pits. It's it's one of the worst exposure situations, but it makes you really think about what we're doing when we stuff buildings full of chemicals and put people inside them too. Can I have the next slide, Allison? This is my chemical pathways into our bodies, because sometimes thinking about how we get the chemicals into our bodies helps us decide on a project by project basis what's really important for that project. So ingestion is all about household dust, pesticides, water, things like E. coli and PFAS get into our bodies this way. Inhalation, we've learned a lot about COVID and air pollution, and formaldehyde comes in through inhalation. And the transdermal exposure is like personal care products, the stuff we rub on our bodies, cleaning products, construction chemicals. And I think it's worth looking at this slide again, because it makes us think about which products we're choosing for what kind of projects. Next, Allison. All right, so the AIA Materials Pledge should not be working like 5 silos. It should be more integrated like the rings. So we need to think about how you're not going to pick just one thing that has one category and just one consultant. We're all going to do this together, and it's not on just some of our projects, it's on all of our projects. Next slide. So when we think about how we're going to get started, because we have to start somewhere, what if you picked 2 different types of building products? and worked across your firm on those? Or what if you picked 2 different building types that your firm does commonly? There's a lot of similarities between building types. I do a lot of affordable housing in K through 12 public schools. And if you think about it, they use a lot of the same building materials, right? They're both going to be built. No one's going to do any maintenance for 50 years. And they're housing our most vulnerable populations. So this isn't something that like is some crazy thing that we made up, right? We've got some science behind us. Allison, next slide. I want you to think about the concept of trusted advisors. You need to know where to go to get good science. The Green Science Policy Institute has been a great resource for us with the 6 classes of chemicals. If you haven't seen the videos yet, they have videos, short videos for each one of the classes, and it's a great way to start thinking about what the chemicals are, why they're bad, and where you find them. The Silent Spring Institute has this great app called Detox Me, which is something that you can think about your personal life and the personal choices you make and what you bring into your homes. And that really relates to what we do at work. Next slide. And then we have other organizations that help us translate the science into our work. And Healthy Building Network has the Home Free site, which is great. It's all about affordable housing, but it's a great way to talk to lay people. It's not full of architectural jargon. It explains why you're concerned about what building products and how to approach them. It's a really excellent resource. And the International Living Futures Institute, you don't have to be all in on an LBC project to work with the website. I have some client firms that are spending a lot of time with declare labels. They're going to make the declare labels their basis of design as much as possible and try to encourage more people to declare their products or at least get better with material transparency. So next slide, Allison. One thing I really want to emphasize is that we need to draw a line from healthier materials through low embodied carbon to environmental and social justice. And I've been thinking about, because we can do all of that. I've been thinking about an analogy that makes sense. And I was thinking about when my kids were little and we started buying organic fruits and vegetables. And I was focused on what they used to call the dirty dozen, which is when pesticides are on fruits that you eat the skins of, like berries and peaches. That's kind of the worst exposure. So I was avoiding those, but I wasn't really thinking about oranges and melons because I don't eat the skins on those. So, you know, what difference did it make for me? But then as we learned more about Cancer Alley and the photos that Anne showed, people literally live next door to those factories. The whole series of low status homes right along, they sit right next door to those factories and they have no protection at all. So if you think about that, and then you think about the people who work in the fields where the oranges and melons are being sprayed with all these chemicals and what they have to do, you realize that my personal choice affects a whole bunch of other people, usually in lower status communities. And that translates to the whole thing about PVC. Like if you're doing affordable housing and you're trying to help a low status community and you're putting PVC in it, then you're just harming another community. And the FSC wood, as Anne mentioned earlier, FSC wood is not just about checking lead boxes. It does all sorts of other good stuff that we want to be doing. It has sustainably managed forests. It protects deforestation and wildlife habitat and water quality. And the newest version of FSC protects us against forced labor and slave labor in the market. And that's really important. So we need to be thinking beyond just how the final product ends up in our building and what it means. And then I've got one more slide, Allison. And I've been reading Majora Carter's new book, and that's what's got me thinking a lot about equity and low status communities. It's been super helpful to think about. And with that, I think I'm ready to trade off to Charlie. You ready, Charlie?
Yes, thanks, Lisa. Allison, you can go forward. I want to just take a few minutes to talk with you about process. Both Lisa and Anne write fantastic specifications. They take these broad concepts and translate them into the products and the manufacturers that we really recommend to project teams to meet these goals. Unfortunately, not all product types have good answers yet. But picking up on what Lisa was saying, we can think about these micro level goals, whether it be avoidance of forced labor or reduction of embodied carbon or healthier chemical attributes. And we go through this cycle of education, advocacy, mitigation, and elimination to reach these macro level goals. And we won't get there in a single lap. I just want to bring this up to illustrate that every contribution that every single product in each and every specification makes can either be harmful or less harmful or neutral or indeed regenerative. And we won't get to regenerative in a single step, but we can take small steps to get there. Next. So if you think about an attribute and a product type, so type X gypsum wallboard might be a product type. It will be somewhere, and the attribute might be materials health. It lands somewhere on a spectrum. You don't know what it contains. It's disclosed and you don't like what's in it. It contains fewer red listed chemicals than the typical, or it's optimized and those red listed chemicals are just absent in the product. The force that moves a product and indeed moves the market forward is our voices amplified by the checkbooks that we influence. So, picking up on the idea of small goals, I really encourage you to think about, as Lisa was saying, setting those small goals and giving these products and these manufacturers a push in the direction of this optimization. Next. This brings up an issue of keeping track of it all. The biggest obstacle that we see, but one that we've really found ways around, is knowledge management. When you think about the silos in a typical design, build, and operate process, a lot of information is lost along the way. The specifications may be great, but there are substitutions, so the submittals look somewhat different. So you're losing information about why products fall out of consideration. So what really, we espouse a process in which all of the data is captured. And I would really caution against using a spreadsheet to be the receptacle for this information. We all know that reconciling spreadsheets can be a challenging task. If any one contributor adds a column or a row, suddenly you've lost the ability to make comparisons over time. So that idea of captured data that supports a clear process for communication about preference for products, and that ultimately leads to confidence on the part of all stakeholders: owner, design team, construction team, trade partners, operator, in the products that are put forward, in the process that each of them contributes to reach the overall macro goal. And ultimately, this brings about cultural change. We've worked with firms and indeed with clients that have a very different attitude about this than they did 10 years ago. Just a quick anecdote here. On our first living building, we had to fight against a campus standard. There was a particular clear floor product that had been used for a long period of time on campus, and there was great resistance to the change. Because of a living building requirement, we moved to Vermont Natural Coatings Polyway. So instead of a petroleum-based urethane product, this is actually using the whey from a Cabot cheese factory. The byproduct of cheese making is the polymer base for this floor finish. Fast forward 8 years, we're on the same campus, and one of the trade shop leaders was reviewing specifications, and in a kickoff meeting for a project, he said, "Have you considered using Vermont Natural Coatings poly-waste system? We've used it for years on campus, and we love it. It really stands up." I bit my tongue, and I shed a little tear, thinking that that was the kind of cultural change that we want to see. You know, that through this repetition and through you know, ultimately a conversion of it's almost a faith conversion. Here's a practitioner who knows and trusts a new product that happens to have the attributes we seek. Next. To Lisa's point, we're not going to fix all of this at once. And you know, when we think about carbon, there are bad actors, exemplified by this pickup truck, and not so bad actors in the outback. And then there are excellent actors, the small hybrid vehicle. We pick our efforts here. There are some places where it's very easy to move from the bad actor to a not so bad actor, and other places where you can move from a not so bad actor to an optimized actor. Our data show that products in projects are all over the map, and that's okay. The goal is really to get a little bit better with each project so that the incremental efforts add up to major market movement. Next, please. What I want to leave you with is this idea that it's not that different from what you're doing already. When we think about these swim lanes, the design team identifies product types that are necessary, sometimes specifies particular products by particular manufacturers. Those are submitted on, the submittals are approved, and the product is installed. Sometimes there's a performance spec in that product selection is left to trade partners. And in any case, there are really 3 very influential places to intervene: just before the specification, seeking data, looking for better, even slightly better products that can go in, just before submittal, influencing trade partners toward better decisions. The most important part of this diagram is the feedback loop, to know what was actually used and to take data about price and ingredient disclosure and performance characteristics and feed that back into the beginning of the process for your next project so that you're in this iterative process of improvement. And with that, we want to make sure that we have time for conversation and discussion. So I'm going to turn it back to you, Allison.
Great. Well, thank you for this excellent presentation. I have many questions myself. I'll encourage folks to use the chat box and start adding questions in there. Beth or Laura, if you want to help me facilitate that as questions pop up. I am going to stop sharing my screen so I can see all of you better. And I think, I can start the questions. So I think, what I've heard from all of you is, among many things, is, you don't have to do everything all at once. That this is incremental change, and if we can make a little bit of, if we can advance material selection a little bit on each project over time, it's cumulative and adds up. In that regard, I guess I have the question of, if we look at low-hanging fruit or material categories, or like where would be a good place for architecture firms to start that would be an easy first step or easy first category of materials to look at. And any of you can chime in.
Lisa, you want to go?
Sure. I think Division 9 is an easier place to start. You've got places like Mindful Materials that can help you with that. Everybody touches stuff on the inside. But what I really think matters is how many times have we all tried to make a design idea and the owner says like, yeah, I don't want to do that. So figure out what's really important to your owner and do that. Pick something that your owner can't say, yeah, that's too expensive. And my example for this is the last time I went to Greenbuild in person, Sandy Mulkern talked me into going to a tour at Loyola University. You guys all mostly know Sandy, right? She used to be our USG rep forever. She's a proud Loyola alumni. And they're at the edge of Lake Michigan. They're about 3 inches above the water level over there. And the sustainable director of the campus or whatever, he was walking us around, showing us all these really cool projects that had to do with stormwater management and water resources. And Sandy tossed him a softball question, and she's like, how have you been so successful getting all these projects on your campus? And he said, this is a Jesuit university. I do what the Jesuits want to do, and nobody ever says no to me. And they're really big on equity and water. So if you can figure out what's really important to your owner, then when the contractor's like, yeah, that's really expensive, the owner's going to say, yeah, we have to do that. And
Lisa,
you want to take a step? Yeah.
I would just add 2 things. There are an awful lot of things that nobody cares about. They're buried in the wall. And that's also a really easy place to start, because no one reads that portion of the specification and no one's going to push back. And, I think, a corollary to that is there's often fear that better products will be more expensive. So we had a big project in Boston that achieved Living Building Challenge materials pedal through change orders. And so every single product that had to be subbed from a decent lead spec to meet LBC was billed to the client, and they reviewed each of those bills. The total of those costs was well under 1%, was actually under 0.5%. And it was a lumpy 1%. There were places where there was a 20% surcharge, but in order to balance out that 20% surcharge, there were an awful lot of places where there was 0 cost. So without the certification mandate, you can put this in and accept all of those 0 cost changes, and no one's the wiser.
Yeah, I want to reinforce what Charlie said. There's so many things nobody cares about. When's the last time you had a fight with a client over which exactly insulation product you were going to use? And also, I mean, you say no one reads those sections of the spec. Nobody reads the spec. Lisa and I both know that. So basically what you need to do is you need to fix your gypsum board section and make sure you only have low embodied carbon gypsum in it. And you need to just make sure that's fixed and written, and you don't have to fix it again. I mean, Lisa and I don't write a gypsum board spec every week. We have our gypsum board spec that we reuse. We make sure it's up to date quarterly. We make sure it's ready, but we don't rewrite it every time. Insulation, same. Gypsum shaft wall, same. Joint sealants, same. Joints, who's fire stopping? I mean, we can go on forever. And there's so many of these products that you can get in there that you can improve. You can improve the embodied carbon, the health impacts very quickly, very easily, and you don't need to go back and look at it again.
Yep. I think all of those points are great, and I do want to I guess reiterate the point about cost and kind of focus on that a little, because cost, the cost of green used to be a huge thing. So if you guys could say a little bit more, I know we talked about this a week or so ago, but that really the preferable sustainable products don't necessarily come at a higher cost anymore. I don't know if you have any examples, or if you can talk a little bit more to cost or trends you're seeing in certain product categories where cost is really irrelevant. Not irrelevant, but meaning it's not more expensive to choose a sustainable product.
Right. I guess I'll say first that the first step in all of this is information that you can trust. So, it's very important if we talk about a product that has one of these preferable qualities, be it health or justice or low embodied carbon, knowing the source of that is very important. So that could be a HPD, that could be a declare label, that could be an EPD, but it's important to begin with that foundation of trustworthy information. So with that in place, you can often find that the products you're using already have these qualities, or working with the vendors that you typically specify from, they have an alternate line that has those qualities. So I would really encourage people to begin with that, the relationships you already have in place, and ask the cost question. We've seen instances where there's a markup by a subcontractor that has nothing to do with increased cost. They think the client is willing to pay a premium for healthy materials, and they're perfectly happy to charge a premium for healthier materials, when in fact the distributor doesn't charge a premium for healthy materials. So getting to the source of that information can be very helpful. I would say in insulation, paint, drywall, those are places where you can really do great work without any added cost.
Yep, great. I'm looking, thanks, that's super helpful. I'm looking through the chat and I do see there's a question on, yes, from Adam, aren't we past incrementalism and low-hanging fruit? We're in a climate emergency. And so the question, if I read it a little farther, is, we should be doing whole building life cycle assessments. So it brings up the question of embodied carbon. Can any of you speak to that and how that you're starting to see that influence your specifications?
You want to go?
No, you go, and just published a whole bunch of really great spec language around this. So go for it.
So the Carbon Leadership Forum, which is carbonleadershipforum.org, they publish baselines. So basically what we have now is we have buildingtransparency.org has EC3, which is where you can find all the EPDs, and you can go to the website and you can search by your locale, and you can search by the product type, by specification number, and you can figure it out, and you can start to see where everything is. But what's going on is Carbon Leadership Forum now is putting out baselines. So there are, I think, 12 categories they have baselines for. So now you can go and you can see what is achievable, and you don't have to think. You can just say Carbon Leadership Baseline, that's my line. And you can write that into all of your specs. I just worked with Lana Rarick, who's ZGF out of Portland, and Beth Strosane, who is Applied Building Science out of Seattle. And we all worked together. We developed specification language. So it's all sitting on buildingtransparency.org, which is where EC3 sits. And you can find that language. You can give it to the spec writer that you work with. If you aren't working with Lisa or me, because I don't know why, but they must have a reason, Lisa. I mean, what could it be?
Well,
but anyways,
there's only two of us.
There's only two of us. The rest of Beth and Lana, but Lana's employed. But anyway, so, and maybe you have an in-house spec writer, but it's all there. It's very basic, but there's no reason on this planet to not have a carbon requirement for your gypsum board, to have a carbon requirement for your XPS, which I believe Mass is one of the states that requires the new low GWP. Yep. And I'm to the point now where there's so many states that require it. I work all the way across the country. I don't care anymore. When I hear that Indiana and Utah both have VOC requirements, I stop looking up who has VOC requirements. That means everybody does. When it hits mega land of Utah, everybody has it. We're done talking about it. So just get that information and put it in your specs. But the Carbon Leadership Forum is constantly coming up with new baselines. Every 6 months, I get the email, here's our new baseline sheet. And it's all there, and it's all basic, and it's all written in clear language in English. And if you need help understanding it, go to buildingtransparency.org, find that spec language, and it'll be fun. This is going to be great. We're going to talk about specs for another half an hour. Who would have thought?
Anything to add, Lisa or Charlie, on embodied carbon?
Well, one thing about better products are better products, and sometimes they cost more because they're better. So when you look at something like acoustic ceiling panels, you can still get that really crappy old ceiling panel that they were still making in the 1970s. It has an NRC of 0.5. It's about 3/8 of an inch thick. You can still get that, and it's cheaper. But the products that the ceiling manufacturers are really investing in now are their high-performing products. They have lower embodied carbon. They have healthier materials. They're thicker. They have better NRC. They are just better products. So it depends on what you're comparing things to.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if you're comparing it to, I can't believe it's not wood, luxury vinyl tile, I can believe it's not wood. It's not wood, and it's garbage. And
Yep.
It's like, are you kidding me? And don't you guys see that? I see it all the time. I'm like, are you kidding? And medical
repeat
professionals
after me.
love putting on
There's-
their floors.
Yeah, repeat after me. There's nothing luxurious about vinyl tile.
I mean, right? Really? It's really bendy, but oh, and I know. So I mean, I used to work in a firm that did a lot of college and university work, and they required it in the dorms because all these kids that parents are paying $50,000 a year to go to college. And of course, they're all raised in homes that have vinyl tile on the bedroom. So of course there's no carpeting. I mean, I'm like, this is crazy, but that's what they do. So I don't know. And then whatever, don't get me started on luxury vinyl tile. We'll go on for days.
Well, I think this relates to another a sort of topic that showed up in the chat panel is durability and maintenance. I think, people think vinyl is more durable. It's easier to, like, for the facilities teams to wash it and, spray it down with water and chemicals, and which is not healthy. But I guess as far as durability and maintenance, do you have, any talking points or any words around that in choosing more sustainable materials? We all come up against that a little bit. I think it's more of a this is how we've always done it thing with the durability and maintenance, sometimes with facilities departments and things like that.
Sometimes the way they've always done it is to coat it with lots of chemicals, strip it off, and then polish it again. And that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
And some of the sheet vinyl stuff isn't durable and stain resistant either. I was with one of my kids at a children's hospital a few years ago. Nothing major, but she's in the recovery room and they're offering her slushies because that's what you do when kids come out of recovery. And I look around on the floor, and the floor in this recovery room has bright red and bright blue splotches all over the place on the floor because kids who are coming out of anesthetic drop it on the floor everywhere. And this is a hospital. This has got to be cleaned up fairly frequently, and it's stained all over the place. So what's the point?
I mean,
You're not getting.
Say to that, Allison, is we'll often encourage experimentation. That we often hit resistance. Well, we've always used this. We're happy with this, and someone has to prove to us that this other thing is equivalent. So, pick one lobby, pick one office, pick one representative space, and try something better. Particularly for institutional clients, this is a way to get them out of their sort of stuck loop to say, well, you'll have the evidence from your own maintenance crew and from your own, capital refresh cycle to know what this looks like. You wouldn't believe me if I said it was equivalent. So why not put 5% of this in and run an experiment in your own facility? And that's a way that we've sort of broken through, not just on those individual products, but then on a different mindset that the way they've always done it may not be the perfect way to do it, and their expectations may evolve to include these higher performance characteristics beyond cheap and durable.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense. Scrolling through the questions, the chat a little bit more, there are a couple specific, kind of jumping around, but there are a couple questions on specific materials. So there's a question on FSC and the idea that there are tropical hardwoods that are FSC certified seems a little counterintuitive. I guess, do you guys have any comments on using tropical hardwoods that are FSC certified, or just FSC certification more particular to certain types of woods?
So, I mean, a tropical hardwood that's FSC certified is likely a plantation hardwood. So, you get, how do I put it? That was deforested, and now it's not deforested because it's previously deforested. So, in general, we, in New England, we see a number of projects looking to, the question is really what characteristics are you looking for in that hardwood? So, for instance, if it's durability and rot resistance, you may be able to move to black locust. Has a different aesthetic, but it has the same kinds of performance characteristics. So, and again, often we would, we've seen black locust for small porches. We've seen black locust for institutional exterior furniture. It's a cultural shift, but a lot of this comes around to risk avoidance for the clients. Do you want to be associated with tropical deforestation? If not, here's an option. So thinking about it in terms of brand value, thinking about it in terms of sort of spotlight stories that a project may want to be telling about how it's different from the norm. It's the same question, but you can turn it in a different way and sometimes have a different answer.
Yep, that's helpful. A helpful way to look at things, definitely. This is a very specific material question. Recommendations around exterior fluorinated metal coatings. That's very specific, but do you guys have any thoughts on that?
That is tough. I've been diving into that a little bit now to try to figure out which of the exterior coatings has more or less PFAS. In New England, we mostly talk about PVDF coatings, which obviously have PFAS, but in other parts of the country, they use FEVE, which also has PFAS but has a different number of coats. And so I'm still trying to figure this out, and it'll be part of as we go forward and try to figure out how to avoid PFAS. Anodizing is a good choice, but
and another thing I might just add to that is advocating. We need to put finishes on the projects that we're building today, and we know that they fall short of our goals. So, sending a message, which is to say, we are reluctantly specifying and procuring this product. We hate the fact that it has these chemical properties, which have these upstream and downstream effects. We will move our purchasing to someone who innovates in this space. They're not going to be invented overnight, but if there isn't a call for that innovation, it may never happen. So this goes back to earlier things that my co-panelists have said about not focusing on perfection, but also not being quiet when you're suffering those compromises.
There is a Fluoripon Pure is a PFAS. It still has PFAS in it.
it still has PFAS in it. It is an excellent coating, and that's what I'm recommending for everything, but not everyone.
It's red list free, and it's hexavalent chromium free, which is the reason, and that's the bonus. But if you're looking to avoid PFAS, I mean, your one option is a silicone polyester, which is probably the next best thing, but it's, it is what it is. And the thing to keep in mind is anodizing is a great idea. And one thing to really keep in mind is anodizing, because it doesn't have a coating on it, is a lot easier to recycle. So if you think about the whole circular economy thing, anodizing has other aspects that are beneficial to you down the line. But if you really need a fluoropolymer, and obviously fluoropolymers are PFAS because the F's right in there, right at the beginning. Fluoripon Pure is your best option.
Okay, great. That's helpful. Beth, I noticed you posted a few questions. Do you want to pose your questions?
This actually came from Jody in the chat. She messaged me directly, but I thought it was such a good question that I definitely want to share it. Can you guys talk about one material that was really easy to make green, really easy to make your spec green, and also one that was surprisingly hard?
Exterior metal coating is surprisingly hard, but it's the durability stuff. And then it's also to make it green, it's what the manufacturers have been doing. It's fascinating to me, like when you talk about joint sealants, because I talk about joint sealants all the time. There's joint sealants. Yeah, of course. Who doesn't? Joint sealants, there's no transparency labeling. There's no declare labels. There might be one. There's very few. There won't tell you what's in their product. What they will do is they'll tell you if their product is red list free. If you do Tremco red list free, you'll get right to their website and they have their whole list. The fascinating thing is about 4 or 5 manufacturers tell us which of their latex sealants are red list free and which of their silicones are red list free. So what we learned from that is silicones, you can make silicones better, you can make latexes better. You can't make the urethanes, there are none of them that are red list free. So we're learning a little something from these manufacturers when they tell us something about their product, and we can go from there. I'm amazed too by companies like Prosoco, who basically in their work on the Bullet Center, they developed new coating products. Prosoco does a lot of concrete coating, they do water, and they do air barriers. And they developed all these products because it was a piece. One of their goals was to work on the Bullet Center to produce red list free products, but to develop that. And it's fascinating because when you see one person head that direction, it's like everybody follows. I mean, it's fascinating because you'll get a bunch of them after the fact. And the one really good example that isn't happening is Fluoripon Pure. Nobody else has come out with a hexavalent free, chromium free product, right? That's the only one in that category. So I don't know, but we're hoping it's all about market pressure. I mean, this is the United States of America. We're a capitalist society. We all want to make money. It's all about market pressure. If we tell a company we're not going to buy their product, they're going to fix it.
And can you believe we're still arguing about hexavalent chromium? That was the Aaron Brockovich chemical. That was over 20 years ago.
Yeah, but you know what? I don't know how we're going to get rid of it because that's what they bathe. It's used in galvanizing. So I'm like, if you're going to use metal stud, and all metal stud is galvanized because, again, why? And the reason is because the manufacturers can't get it from the product line to the site without it starting to rust. Even though all metal stud is basically inside, they shouldn't need to be galvanized, but it's all galvanized. And I was working on a big job and they were talking about, you can get it with no hexavalent chromium, but it's a lead time issue. And this conversation was happening in 2020 and there was some supply chain issues. So there was no way. It was like, you already had a lead time disaster and now it's like, they couldn't add that on. But no, they can do it. They can make galvanized steel without hexavalent chromium, but we're not forcing them to do that.
Yeah, most of the really challenging products from a health point of view are green chemistry problems, like fluid applied flooring, that everybody calls epoxy flooring. It always has bad chemicals in it, almost always.
Yeah, but wait, what about liquid linoleum? The liquid linoleum guys say you can put it in a commercial kitchen.
That looks like so much fun, but I haven't had anyone want to do that yet. Charlie, do you have anyone bite on liquid linoleum yet? I want to put it in fitness centers because I want to do away with recycled crumb rubber flooring.
Which is a good thing to get rid of. I put liquid linoleum out a bunch of times, but I, unlike Charlie, don't know if it actually ends up on the job site. They might substitute it out before they get to the job site. I don't have the answer to that.
So that's the closing the loop challenge. And that's where really, there's getting the client to buy into it for the specification. There's getting trade partners to buy into it for actual procurement. And then there's knowing what actually happened. So, and then beyond that, there's telling manufacturers what actually happened. I mean, we often get calls from manufacturers asking us whether their products were installed in a living building. And it just goes to the opacity of the overall process. And when we can find ways to close those loops, it can be a very powerful force to bring about innovation.
Mm-hmm.
But for easy things include acoustic insulation. All that is healthy and formaldehyde free. And what I've been calling like everyday paints, like what you put on the walls and ceilings in an office building or something, just basic latex paints, and the awesome coatings from Vermont Natural Coatings, the Polyway. Like those were surprisingly easy.
All right, Adam, I couldn't even lift a 300-pound weight. So there's no danger of me dropping a 300-pound weight onto a liquid linoleum floor. I can't even get that up off the ground. So that's the answer to that. Just to hang out with
not just about you, Ed.
No, but we do a lot of like fitness rooms that don't have heavy weights in them, that don't have Olympic racks. They're just, like part of an apartment building that wants to have a room that they can do stuff in.
Yoga.
Yeah.
Charlie, someone wants you to talk about your computer program.
Oh, is this the
Red green
master spec underway?
There was another question about the software you developed.
Oh, yeah. So this is not a plug, and I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime. What we about 6 years ago, we started to develop software because we realized that spreadsheets were not working. We had at that point 3 Living Building Challenge projects underway, and we learned a lot on each project, but we found that we were losing information and forgetting details just as fast as we were gaining this valuable information. And so, for instance, we had different information about a given product on 2 different projects because we developed a better relationship with the manufacturer and they divulged more. It was great, but it was a library problem. So what we came to realize is that having a multidimensional database would allow all of that information to be captured. And then we found that we were the gatekeepers, that Lisa and design architects had to email us to say, hey, what would you use for the blank? And it was expensive for them and it was expensive for us. And we just couldn't keep up with the volume of inquiries. So we turned that from a private database into a public database where subscribers could come in and see one another's research as it happened. And then we realized that putting a project management module on top of that so that it could be the place where specifications were built, where the place where submittals were approved, then we had this sort of beneficial loop of good information to everybody on the team, followed by a continuous thread to know what was actually used, to then feed back on the next project and make that be the template for the next project. So how will I put it? It's a complex series, or excuse me, it's a complex combination of very simple questions. What's the best fill in the blank that I should use? You just have to answer that 1,000 times and you'll have a really good project. So then the question is, how do you keep track of that over time so that not everyone needs to be an expert on these topics and they can find a trusted resource and make incremental improvement where it's possible today?
Yep. And then adding on to that, there was a question on, is there a red list free master spec template underway, or how do you guys address the red list in your specifications?
Master spec doesn't, Lisa, do you use VSD spec link? I don't use that.
No.
Master spec doesn't have anything red listy. No,
No.
and I don't think they're going to develop it. I mean, it's really complicated. Like Charlie's saying, it's super, super complicated. I mean, the way I tackle it is the categories that I know I can improve things. I mean, the question about what do you do about multiple products? A lot of these categories, especially the stuff that's hidden in the wall, there's multiple people. I mean, if you get away from the hexavalent chromium obsession with metal stud, there's 4 metal stud manufacturers that have a transparency label, which is an HPD or a declare label, and an EPD. So they're all playing because they're all competing, and they all, and that's it. I mean, that's again the competitive marketplace. They're all kind of coming along for the ride. There are places where it's a little difficult. The liquid linoleum came out like what, 4 years ago, Lisa, Duracryl, but I think Mannington has one now, right?
Oh,
There's other guys
know.
following along. So if you just wait long enough, but yeah.
As long as somebody's buying the liquid linoleum, someone else will make one too.
Yeah.
But one of the things we learned from the Living Building Challenge projects is that there used to be a whole bunch of stuff we put in the spec that we didn't really say what it was. So, like adhesives, or I affectionately refer to it as construction goop. Anything sort of wet applied that the contractor pulled off the back of his truck. We didn't usually say what it was. And through all the research with Living Building Challenge, I try to specify those things by name and call them out by name, because telling the contractor they should buy red list free stuff is really kind of cruel if you don't tell them what to buy.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
And if I've got, these projects over here and those projects over here and these ones back here, they're all picking new products. I get a whole lot of those in my spec. And so the spec is getting better every day, but there are still some categories that we can't pull off.
Well, I would say that there are 30 to 40% of categories that we can't pull off. So when we look at Living Building Challenge projects, the mandate is to do the best that can be done in every single product category. And a typical office project will end up with between 600 and 800 products approved on specifications, this brand of that product type. And when we look at the approval path for each of those, about a third are really good, well-disclosed, red list free. Another third are the best that we can do. It's a product that contains formaldehyde so we know that it contains formaldehyde, but we also know that the chemistry that, you know, to perform in that particular product type, no one has a formaldehyde-free product. I'm thinking about structural plywood. And then the other third, we just don't get good disclosure, or the disclosure we get makes it clear that there are, you know, high quality quantities, not high quantities, impactful quantities of red listed chemicals. So we call that a general red list exception. So in the case of those 2/3 of products, we're advocating, and what we're looking for is a trend in that we want to see over time the number of cases in which we have to advocate decreases. And we're far from where we'd like to be, but I can tell you we're well along the path in a decade. And importantly, it takes us about 1/5 of the time that it did in the early days of this. So however daunting this is, and I don't dispute the fact that it can feel daunting, because we're using common language and because we're making common requests of manufacturers, the information is available, the process is improving, and the effort required of each of us is diminishing. So I'm very optimistic about the trend.
And there's a couple of really interesting things that I've learned from watching people present about living building challenge buildings. The first thing is 800 products, construction products. Here's a tip: try not to use so much stuff. I mean, you poured a concrete, you just poured a concrete floor. Do you really need to cover it? Because if you don't cover it, you don't have to add the glue and you don't have to add the product. And also, the other one way you can get around a living building challenge requirement is using salvaged product. It's the best way to get a red list free locker. You get a salvaged locker and then you don't have to worry about what it's made of. So the point is, there's all these great circular economy lessons we learn from these living building challenge buildings. Use less stuff and use salvage materials, reuse materials. And it's just something to think about, that this is about, it's not just about living building challenge red list free. It's just about, let's get our material palette improved and let's build better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think what this brings up for me also is, you know, we're sort of talking about, the conversation has been very focused on, I would say, design phase issues today. Do you have any tips on, like, you know, substitutions and or just working with a contractor to get the right products on board? I mean, you know, the specs are not perfect. There'll be things that have to be worked out during construction. I guess, do you just have any tips for architects on how to work with contractors and educate, you know, in some cases, educate contractors on finding the right materials and the right substitutions?
The biggest innovation that I would point to in process comes from a project we did with Turner Construction, where the project engineer brought up the idea of a pre-submittal. This is not an early submittal, but it was just a list of all of the products that each of the trade partners proposed to use within a couple of weeks of the notice to proceed. You know, if the specs contained 3 products that were equivalent, it's very clear that not all 3 would be bought. Only one of them. Which one's it going to be? And then, you know, if the drywall was specified, we could be fairly certain that the joint compound and the corner bead and the tape would come from that same vendor. That was not specified. You know, the tons were specified, but the pounds that go along with it weren't. But by getting that complete list of accessory products from the trade partner well before the submittal period, it gave us a chance to not make decisions within a 14-day submittal review process. So, you know, that single procedural change has drastically improved our yield rate because we can do that on a separate schedule well in advance of the, you know, the order release or the required on job date.
Yeah, that's an excellent suggestion. I think
I've talked to clients about can you, when you know, obviously there's a CM and they're bidding and they're getting the best bid for all these different pieces, the waterproofing piece, the curtain wall. Can you ask them, when you're asking them their price, ask them their product as well? Because if someone's going to use a PVC roof and it's only a little bit more money to use an SBS modified, maybe you want to make that decision because if there's health impact goals on the project. I've had owners pushed back saying, I can't ask any more questions of my subs. I won't have anybody bid. And I can appreciate it's complicated out there, but it's something to think about, that if you ask them what the price is, you can also ask what system they're going to use. And then you can make an informed decision based on all of those facts, because there are better in some of these categories, waterproofing, roofing, that really nobody really cares if you use WR Grace product or if you use a Tremco product. I mean, it's not like it's going to make the building look any better, but there might be some impacts from the product that's chosen that might be that might have a real what might be a client goal.
Mm-hmm.
And something that we've learned from actually the projects at Harvard is when you start a project, and this doesn't work for public bid work, but when you put out your RFP, tell them what your goals are. You know, that the owner should say, I want to do a healthier building. I'm interested in certifications. I'm interested in this, so that you don't hire people who don't care. And that's the same for the design team, and it's the same for the contractor. Don't hire a CM firm that could care less about it, because it just won't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And what I was going to say earlier is, I'm sure Anne does this in her specs too, is that when we spec a product, a basis is design and 3 equals, we say why they're there. We give some indication of what's important about them. And then in the submittals, it says what you need to submit, so that when a substitution request comes in and it doesn't have any of that stuff, and you've got different people doing CA who were in on the design because the project took 4 years, then at least there's a little bit of a trail there. I've been calling it like leaving breadcrumbs for why we made certain choices.
Yeah, all my specs have a sustainable design submittal section, and I don't use the word lead because I don't care if you're getting a certification or not, or, you know, just sustainable design. And they have the list of all the requirements. So if someone's been trained correctly in CA, they'll know they have to go look for all those things. And further along in the spec under part 2 is all the performance requirements. Need this, need this, need this. You can figure out, you can put a performance requirement to make it red list free. If you're doing it in a category where there aren't any red list free products, you're just going to annoy the contractor, and at some point they'll just be so annoyed with you they won't work with you very well. But you can also put that performance requirement in and then give them 3 products, or give them 2 products, and but that's another way of covering it. You don't have to just lean on specific products. You can lean on performance requirements.
And I would like not to have to call them sustainable design submittals. Let's just make them submittals. Because
Yeah,
nobody knew what VOC content was, and now you can't get anything that doesn't have anything like that without VOC content. So if you have the manufacturers who have all that data, they send it out with every submittal package, whether you ask for it or not, because they want to show you, they want to show off a little bit.
All right, the question about how to get rid of plastic, I don't know. And we live in a country that nobody likes regulations. You know, none of us, we all are smart. We all know what we need to do. And every single person on this call, I mean, to some degree or not, doesn't like regulations. We're not going to get regulations in this environment. We all have to stop buying plastic and start, and that's the petroleum thing. That's just get the petroleum out of your product. Just, and that goes back to a lot of these questions, durability. I mean, it's so interesting. There was a really great, I think Healthy Building Network sponsored it like 6 months ago, and it was about antimicrobials. And so there were all these people, and a lot of them were from Kaiser Permanente. They were like the hospital pieces, and every single one of them, they're talking about antimicrobials. Every single one of them talked about washing your hands, which was hilarious because we've all been beaten upside the head about washing our hands. But they were talking about, they had a really interesting thing. They said this was Kaiser. They didn't want PFAS to be used as stain retardants because they don't work, because if you're at Kaiser Permanente, one of the stains you're fighting is blood, plus the slushies that Lisa saw. And so they said the PFAS don't stop the stains, and then we have to go in and clean the fabric, and the PFAS make it harder to clean the fabric, which I thought was fascinating. So get some of those added products out, get the plastics out, and just go back to as much as we can to natural materials, and don't forget to wash your hands. That's what
we are. I want to keep track of time. We have a little time left, but I wanted to make sure to ask before we leave, to ask at least this one final question is a tip. Like, what is the most effective way to work with you on a project, or at what point do you feel like you can have the most impact with the project team? Or one of your favorite ways to work with a project team?
Lisa wants to get involved early. I know that. I know that's her answer. Go, Lisa.
I like to get involved early. I want to be invited to the sustainability charrette. I don't want it to happen and have me find out about it at 90% CDs. I do.
That
I do
happens all
know
the time. Yeah.
what I don't like is I don't want to be treated like an administrative assistant. I want to attend the meetings and know what's going on. And feedback is a gift. Remind yourself, feedback is a gift. If something went terribly wrong in the last project, I need to know.
Oh, that's a huge problem. And even when I was on staff at an architecture firm, no one would tell me something. And then I heard this one time, I heard this guy's like, oh yeah, the fluid applied air barrier is not working. So I was like, okay. So I took it out. We stopped fluid applied. We went to peel and stick, all good. Non-bituminous peel and stick. A year and a half later, I'm talking to him. He's like, oh no, we don't use fluid applied anymore because you told me that. He's like, what? I said, on that job. He's like, we solved that problem the following week. Didn't I tell you that? And I'm like, no, but do you realize you've set policy for this firm for a year and a half? But it's like communication is so critical. So yeah, I mean, I'll come to the sustainability shred. I'll be more than happy to come. I want to be involved early because you're going to make material decisions early. I can hopefully steer you away from luxury vinyl tile, get you somewhere better. But, hopefully we can fix this. And there's so many times I have these conversations with people and they're like, oh, I didn't think about that. That's a good idea. And it's like, great, let's just do this. But, when the AIA surveys own clients, what the clients, what do you trust architects for? The answer is like 85% material choice. That's what your clients all depend on all of you for. They think you're choosing the materials, all right? And I mean, you look at the AIA client surveys. I am not making this up. And it's amazing because I say to people all the time, the spec writers are who help you find the materials, and that's the paint with which you're painting. So if you want to make a pretty building, make sure your spec writer is using the right set of pastels. That's all.
Charlie, any thoughts on working with you and what's a successful example?
Yeah, I think a lot of it for me comes down to how the goals are articulated. And, though we come from, a lot of this process was developed to support living buildings. There is no bright line between Living Building Challenge materials goals, LEED materials goals, and just the right thing to do in an architectural practice. And I would say that any firm or any project that sets a 10% compliance goal, a 2% compliance goal, is miles ahead of standard practice. So I would just say that it's great to work with clients who are aware of these issues, are fired up about these issues, and are willing to use their voices about these issues. So one of the things that we've developed is this rallying cry that there are 3 ways to win. You can win in sustainability just by getting more information out of manufacturers and into the conversation. So there's one. You can win through advocacy. We bought this terrible product. We wish we didn't have to buy this terrible product. We're going to raise our voices and say, next time we're going to try not to use this product. And then the third would be actual optimization. We have trustworthy information, and we know that it contains fewer red listed chemicals, or hopefully no red listed chemicals. And having those ideas of different ways to make progress, that's my recruitment call. And then everyone here is empowered to make 5, 10, 100 decisions over the course of a year. And if we're consistent in that application, we'll make tremendous strides.
Yep, that's very helpful, very helpful. And I agree on early involvement. Definitely, we try to do that in our office on projects. To get the materials conversation started early is key. Lara, Beth, any other, I know we're almost at the end.
Yeah, I know we're wrapping up, and guys, I just want to say, like, this was so great. We've talked a lot preparing this, but I can't tell you, I took several pages of notes. So I really appreciate all 3 of you coming out and sharing your knowledge with us. It's been incredibly helpful. And I just want to remind everyone that the last message in the chat is the link to get CEU credits. So please do not forget to fill out that form. And if nobody has anything else.
And thanks to Allison for moderating. So very
Thanks.
much
Absolutely.
Thank you,
Thanks
Allison.
everyone.
And
Yeah, thanks. It's been fascinating there. We could talk for hours.
Thank
Thank
you
you,
all.
everyone.
Good night.